Our long program presentation will be introduced by club member Joyce Robertson, the classification of human and community services. And our club member, David Bobanick, who will be the panel leader, also has the classification of human and community services. You might say that they are collaborators in human and community services. David will be monitoring your questions, which we invite you to enter through the Zoom chat feature. After the panel completes their prepared remarks, David will present your questions for the panel's response. And now, Joyce Robertson.
Thank you. Like many of you, I got to know Harvest Against Hunger through our Seattle Club going to those food packing parties. There's one story that has stuck with me from one of those days where a staff member, before sending us off to pack food, shared about her own story and why she works there. It was her face of hunger. Growing up, she told us that her mom would often skip meals, and she was a kid and she didn't think much about it. But, you know, she wouldn't sit down at breakfast, and a lot of nights she'd say, I'm not that hungry. You kids go ahead and eat my dinner tonight. That face of hunger shows up and comes in a lot of different forms around Seattle and in our neighborhoods. I think each one of us knows that we know someone in that situation, or doesn't know that we do know someone in that situation, probably have for years. After you hear today's panel, if you want to engage or join our Seattle Rotary email group listing, I'm glad to take your contact information, so send it to me and I'll post mine in the chat box here. Now on to David Bobanick, Director of Harvest Against Hunger.
Thanks, Joyce. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And Joyce, that is such a powerful introduction, because that's one of the things that we always do talk about when we talk about hunger in our community. It is prevalent, it is oftentimes hidden, and it can be right in front of us and we might not know it. And so thank you for that. Thank you for the kind words of introduction. Thanks for all your help and support in gathering the Seattle 4 Rotarians to come and participate at the Harvest Against Hunger work parties. I can't wait till we can do those again. We're going to talk a little bit about the pandemic and what we've learned. One of the great challenges of the pandemic when it comes to hunger relief activities is just the fact that a lot of the systems that we used for many years had to change, had to be modified, new approaches had to be made in ways that food is being provided to people in need in our community. And so that's really what the area of focus or the theme is for today's conversation. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about Harvest Against Hunger and our work, but really the stars of today's show are going to be our panelists, who are going to be talking about their perspective and their role in hunger relief when it comes to the national level, state level, regional, and city community level. So throughout that broad spectrum, these folks are making an impact and really doing some wonderful things. So really today, what we're trying to do is showcase what we learned during COVID, what we learned in terms of service and program activity that worked, and then maybe what we can take forward into the future. You know, I've been doing this work for a long time, and it reminds me of what I think was the early days of hunger relief back in the late 60s and early 70s here in Seattle, where a lot of programs or organizations that didn't consider themselves to be hunger relief organizations were suddenly faced with the common issue of people that were in their associations or within their groups or within their programmatic activity, oftentimes in church communities. Suddenly, that was the common need, was providing food help to those people. And we saw something really similar to that through this time of COVID. We saw a lot of new groups that developed that maybe were providing an education service to a certain community group, or they were doing something else. And suddenly they were then in a position where people were looking to them to provide hunger relief. And from that real new dynamic, a lot of programs have been developed, and excited to talk a little bit about those today and really continue with thinking about what we've learned and what we can take forward. That's me. For those of you who don't know, Harvest Against Hunger is a program of Rotary District 5030. So all the Rotary clubs in the greater Seattle area participate in the work that we do, but we're also a standalone nonprofit 501c3 organization. So kind of a hybrid organization that way, but the support that we get from Rotarians, deep roots in the Rotary community here in the greater Seattle area. So I mentioned today's panelists. And again, these are leaders from across national, local, statewide, hunger relief and other groups. So we're going to hear from Derek Sandison. Derek's the director of the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And WSDA over the past few years has really, I think, quite dramatically increased the programmatic activity that they're doing to help with hunger relief in communities all across Washington. Excuse me. And that's complicated because that includes deep rural communities in maybe northeastern Washington or out on the coast, as well as programs that are serving urban areas. And so, you know, having the flexibility of programmatic activity that allows for supporting programs that are serving different communities really is, it takes a lot of effort, I think, from their perspective, but I also think it really takes a lot of creativity in the program development, the way they're applying funds. Sara Seelmeyer is joining us. Sara is a food security program manager with the United Way of King County. And the United Way is another one of those programs. I really wanted Sara to join us today because I think some of the most dynamic programs in hunger relief now have been developed and incubated through Sara's work at the United Way of King County. And then also joining us all the way from Puerto Rico. So kudos to Yamila for joining us today. Yamila Sterling Baker is manager for the Seattle Food Committee work at Solid Ground. Yamila will talk a little bit more about the work that she's doing. I think we think of hunger relief going through traditional food banks and food pantries and sit-down meal programs, but even those programs have had to change and modify the way that they're providing services. So a lot of the models that were used maybe for a decade suddenly were not able to meet the need of the people that were coming in and those populations that needed food help. So, you know, Yamila and the other folks at the Seattle Food Committee have been innovating new programs, and to see what will be carried forward is going to be very exciting over the course of the next 6 months to a year. So with Harvest Against Hunger, I'm going to just do a really brief overview of our work. And this really serves as kind of the guiding principle for the organization, that providing healthy food to people in need builds healthier communities. And that's really, really important because it's healthy food. It is nutrient dense food. It is food that people oftentimes will make an effort to provide culturally appropriate foods within hunger relief systems, finding ways to get that food to those populations so that we can make sure that not only are they getting food, but it's going to be healthy food and it's going to help their families to grow and to thrive. Through that, we think that's really an important step in building healthier communities. And that means farmers have really good contract relationships with hunger relief organizations. That means that kids going to school will have the kind of nutritious food that they need in order to thrive and excel and to learn and to grow. And then for seniors, it's an opportunity to make sure that they're getting the kind of nutrient density they need to try to stay independent in their lives. So the work that we do at Harvest Against Hunger, as Joyce mentioned, most of you are familiar with the core work, which is where we find the truckload size donations, whether it's apples or potatoes or whatever, onions, carrots, whatever it may be. And then we'll find donated trucking to get it from wherever it is. Today, it's 2 truckloads of potatoes in Mount Vernon. We're going to find donated trucking to get it delivered to one of our hunger relief partners, like a Northwest Harvest, Emergency Food Network, programs like that that then distribute out to hunger relief organizations. The other programs that we have are our Harvest Vista program, where we place AmeriCorps Vista with partner sites, and they're then developing and building food recovery and food system access models, not only across Washington state, but in 6 other states now. Our Farm to Community program, and this is the program, the Harvest Vista, Farm to Community and Capacity Building. These are the areas where we saw the greatest amount of growth in the past couple of years. Farm to Community is a really dynamic partnership that we have with Washington State Department of Agriculture, King Conservation District, and King County to create contractual relationships between hunger relief organizations. Could be a food pantry, could be a sit-down meal program. In the past couple of years, it's been Boys and Girls Club, it's been IRC, it's been a lot of community programs that are now at the forefront of providing food and helping with food access to specific communities. Capacity building is where we're actually partnering with WSDA and other large-scale funders to provide funding to small-scale hunger relief organizations so that they can build capacity to safely handle the food. Particularly the perishable food products that we get in. And then connecting and collaborating. And this is something that when I talk about the deep roots in Rotary, this is when you're a Rotary program, it is part of the DNA of the organization that you connect and collaborate. That's just the way we have always operated. And it means that you're sharing in the work with other organizations and maybe pulling other organizations in or providing a forum, maybe bringing others to the table or even creating a table so that conversations can occur so that new programs can be built and we can find ways to support those organizations that are doing all of the important work across our community. Oops, sorry, Derek. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Derek Sandison, Director of the Washington State Department of Agriculture. For the past 6.5 years, Derek has directed the operation of a department with approximately 900 regular employees and over 200 seasonal employees with an annual operating budget of $160 million. He supports Washington State's agricultural industry, which generates about $10 billion in annual farm gate value through the management of programs for food safety, prevention of food insecurity, plant and animal disease prevention and control, pesticide, fertilizer management, commodity inspection, regional and international marketing and trade. Derek, I feel like your job description is a lot like an executive director description. It's and other duties as needed kind of approach. Derek also oversees the operation of the state's 21 agricultural commodities commissions. Currently is serving as the president of the Western Association of State Departments of Agriculture, as a board member of the Western United States Agricultural Trade Association, and is chairperson of the Marketing and International Trade Committee and National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. Derek, welcome.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the invitation to be with you today. And I first want to thank you for the great work you're doing with Harvest Against Hunger. I mean, the role you played, particularly during the pandemic, was just incredible. So we owe you a great debt for your work. So just by way of background, our agencies historically played a role in many aspects of the food system. David went through some of the things we do in terms of animal health, food safety, quality control of products that are grown and raised here. But the incorporation of federal and state food assistance programs weren't brought to our department until 2010. So for about 11 years, we've been engaged in food assistance. Our food assistance program is managed by Kim Eads, who's worked very hard to build a strong, credible program. We basically, our sort of base role, so let's go pre-pandemic, if you will. I mean, we focused on moving products from USDA, and this is literally food shipped from elsewhere in the country by USDA. It's called the TFAP program, or the Emergency Assistance or Food Assistance Program. And that started in 1983 as first a temporary program and then a permanent program. We at the state level have an EFAP program, or Emergency Food Assistance Program, and that's primarily engaged in moving funds that are appropriated by the state legislature to various contractors around the state. So our food assistance program focuses on that. We're always looking to build relationships with external partners, and in fact, if you look at the way the food system is structured, that's that's sort of the way business is done in Washington State. I wanted to talk a little bit about our what we call the Focus on Food initiative, which actually started in 2018, which to bring the idea was to bring food or elevate food and food systems to a more prominent level in our core business. And some of this has been shaped because of our experience, or some of the objective and the goals have been shaped by our experience with the pandemic. But in essence, we're striving to make sure that all Washingtonians have access to safe and nutritious food. And we're accomplishing that through a number of different goals. And I think the first goal, and think about this as sort of two sides of the equation. While we want to make sure we're moving safe and nutritious food to Washingtonians that need assistance, we also want to help out the farmers and ranchers that produce that food in the state. And so, and particularly in underrepresented farmers and ranchers, but making sure that economic viability is made possible through some of our actions and transactions. We also, this is again something that we really learned or was highlighted during the pandemic, was the need to ensure adequate capacity in operations like David's, making sure there's cold storage, dry storage, in some cases refrigerated trucking. But we know that's extraordinarily important in keeping the various food banks and food pantries around the state in operation. And the third goal is we need to reach outside our existing known food assistance network and reach out to communities and individuals who just for whatever reason haven't been willing to or able to access the known food assistance network. Slide 2, please. So again, a lot of our experience, or our current thinking was shaped by our experience with COVID-19, and literally overnight, the Department of Agriculture's role in food assistance ballooned beyond anything we could have ever imagined. And I want to thank Katie Rains, who's my food policy advisor, because she really took over a lot of the day-to-day operations in terms of this enhanced response to food insecurity. So just in terms of dollars, if you look at the top left, I mean, that adds up to about $140 million that we moved through between April 20 and June of 21. And all of this is outside of our normal book of work. And really things sort of a domino effect back in April of 20, when we learned from some of the larger food NGOs in the state that there was about a 2-week supply of food left, and it was dwindling fast, and they needed help and needed it now. And so we immediately jumped in with both feet and started procurement processes. But along the way, so not only purchasing food ourselves and a lot of it, but also making grants available to the NGOs, doing contracts with contractors like David and others to provide for food boxes. And I should mention too that we had to change the distribution method as well because of social distancing. You could no longer have a food pantry where someone could come in and pick products off the shelves. You had to pre-box and then move those boxes to a distribution point where you could make them available to the public. And so it was a really complex operation we had to transition to very quickly in the process. And in doing so, we know we lost a lot of the volunteer workers that particularly retired individuals that were doing volunteer work at food banks and food pantries. And suddenly they, because of the pandemic, could not come to work. And so we worked with the Department of the Military and put in play at one point about 514, I think, National Guard soldiers that were deployed to help in these boxing efforts and distribution. So point out another thing that was pretty important in the early days of this was that PPE was virtually non-existent. I mean, the PPE was all going to the medical response, but food bank workers, our workers, but they needed PPE, hand sanitizer. There's a whole story around hand sanitizer. It's pretty amazing, but you know, we had to deal with all of that and deal with it quickly. So we put a lot of programs in play, a lot of new programs, and again, I think that it's something that was it's not in our book of work, but we had to adjust overnight. Third slide, please. So I think going forward, I mean, this is what we're working on now. The state legislature, I think, is probably one of the important aspects of their outcomes associated with the pandemic was that there's a lot more appreciation for this food supply chain. I mean, people just when toilet paper is gone from grocery stores, and then all of a sudden all the meat disappears and that sort of thing, people pay attention, right? So the legislature did too, and they were very generous in terms of improving our programs or enhancing our programs. The two on the left here, Farm to School and Food Assistance. Food Assistance is Kim Eads program. But these are existing programs, but we have additional funding to make them work. And the two in the middle, I mentioned earlier that one of the great lessons here is that infrastructure, we need to really pay attention to our infrastructure. So we've now have a stronger grant program for infrastructure. Meat and poultry processing, which was an offshoot of some of the shortages that we saw during the pandemic of meat, poultry, that sort of thing. Our system of custom slaughter, small scale slaughter facilities was overwhelmed by demand during the pandemic. And so we, working with Washington State University, put together a program to help support, not only provide facilities for slaughter and processing, but also for training the workers. And then finally, the Farmers to Family Food Box program and the replacement for that. That was a federal program. Real quickly, USDA put that in place in May of 20, but they abruptly terminated that in May of 21. At its peak, it was probably moving about $5 to $8 million worth of food into the state each month. The interesting thing was that of all the food boxes that came to Washington, we could only account for about 25%. With those 25% went to the known food assistance, our food security network. The other 75 went someplace else. So we've been learning about where they went. We've certainly discovered that there's a lot of underserved communities, particularly BIPOC communities, that have made other arrangements, as David talked about during the pandemic. And so we've been trying to replace that. The $45 million the legislature gave us, just to put this in perspective, the demand is so great that we're coming back to the legislature in January with about a $60 million additional request for capacity around food boxes. So it's that big of a deal. And finally, I want to mention the last thing the legislature asked us to do was to come up with an equity in farming program, and we're working on that as well. But David, thank you. That's my intro. I didn't go too long.
Thank you, Derek. Really nice overview. I know it's quite a complex body of work that WSDA does, particularly in food assistance, and having a front row seat and participating in a lot of those activities. We really do appreciate you and your amazing staff. So you've got really great people working for you.
Great.
So now it's my pleasure to introduce Sara Seelmeyer. Sara's the Food Security Program Manager at the United Way of King County. In her position, Sara leads work to increase access to federal nutrition programs and the emergency food system. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the United Way has delivered groceries to more than 5,000 households weekly and provided meals to over 2,000 youth. Sara works closely with local, state, and national partners to break down barriers to food security and support a just food system. She's a native of Northern Nevada, a proud AmeriCorps alum, so you may see her halo glittering as she's talking, and joined the United Way of King County in 2016. Sara, over to you and welcome.
Thanks so much, David. And thank you all for having me today. I'm thrilled to be here. And also thank you all to everything you all have been doing to create change and support communities. I'm a huge fan of what Rotary does, and you all do some great work. As David said, lead United Way of King County's food security work. Go ahead and go to the next slide, David. And at United Way, we're working to build a racially just community where people have homes, students graduate, and families are financially stable. And we're doing that in two ways right now. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The first is that we're operating direct service programs and providing grants to community agencies to respond to immediate need. We know that hunger was an issue before the pandemic, but it has reached a crisis level during COVID-19. Local experts estimate that hunger in our community tripled at the peak of the pandemic, and we know that rates of food insecurity will remain high for years beyond the pandemic, just like it did after the recession of 2008. So much of our work focuses on responding to that urgent community need because we know that people need food now and are struggling now and need some immediate relief. But at United Way, we also do work to advocate for policy change and ensure an equitable implementation of that policy. I wanted to take just a few minutes to share about one of my favorite pieces of work that United Way is doing right now that was really born out of the pandemic and is direct service work happening in the community, but I think has some opportunities to really inform how we think about food security work in the future. So at the start of the pandemic, we saw food insecurity rates just skyrocket in our community and immense need. The traditional emergency food system, so food banks and food pantries, stretched beyond belief to fill this need and did incredible work. They are truly some of the heroes of the pandemic. And that traditional emergency food system wasn't able to meet the full needs of community members. This was partially because the food available in the emergency food system doesn't always meet the cultural needs of folks who are accessing the food. So it's really hard if you follow a halal diet or if you're looking for specific products like tortillas or beans because you're from a Latinx background. And then we also saw that home delivery options for food were highly valued, but extremely limited. As folks have shared already at the beginning of the pandemic, the volunteer force at food banks really disappeared because many people didn't feel safe volunteering or were unable to. And many food banks weren't able to bring clients in person. And so home delivery was really the primary way for our community to get food out to people quickly. In response, United Way launched a home delivery program in July of 2020 in partnership with DoorDash and 27 local food providers. This is largely food banks and food pantries in King County, but also a number of wholesale food providers. We partnered with Safeway for quite a while on this program as well. This program is currently serving over 5,500 households per week. That's over 15,000 individuals. And over 70% of the heads of households in the folks that we're serving identify as people of color. And over 70% of these households are located in South Seattle or South King County, where we know that food needs and food insecurity is often the highest. And folks have the most trouble getting to a food bank. Transportation resources, public transportation in South King County is just not the same that it is in Seattle. We're also really excited that through this program, we've been able to work with food bank partners and our other food providers to make sure that a significant amount of the food that we're providing is culturally specific. So we offer clients the ability to choose a Latinx box or an Asian Pacific Islander box so that they're getting food that they actually are excited to receive and fits well into their diet versus peanut butter or cans of corn that they might not choose to eat on a regular basis. So how this program works is that clients sign up for home deliveries through a centralized intake process through United Way of King County and our website. We have a team of AmeriCorps members and staff who work directly with clients to support them through that intake process and make sure that they're matched to their local food bank. We're working with those food banks to support them in preparing boxes of groceries for these clients. And then we're able to leverage the technology magic of DoorDash and DoorDash drivers and the capacity there to pick up those boxes of food from the food banks and deliver them directly to people's homes. It works like magic. It's almost just like DoorDash works for restaurant deliveries, where clients can get this no contact delivery, and it's a much safer and less stigmatized way to access the emergency food system. I'm particularly excited about this work for two reasons. One is that it has had a huge impact during the pandemic, but I also think we're learning a lot that we're so excited to carry forward out of the pandemic. So we at United Way, and I hope many of you, believe that nobody should have to wait in line for food at a food bank for multiple hours just to get the basic food they need to get through the week or through the month. This is particularly the case for people who have traditionally been oppressed by systems, so people of color, as well as families, people who are homebound for medical reasons, seniors, folks who might have more trouble accessing the food system. We also feel that we need to reimagine the emergency food distribution system to be client-centered and make sure that people can access the emergency food system in a way that works for them. The pandemic has allowed us to reimagine how the food system works, and we're excited to take all of the lessons and systems beyond the pandemic, because we know that these are working for people both for COVID-19 safety reasons, but also for lots of other reasons. It's just more convenient to have your food delivered to your home. And so our goal at United Way is really to build and envision a community where people can easily order groceries that meet their cultural, dietary, and taste preferences and have those delivered to their door in the lowest barrier method possible. So thrilled to be with you here, with all of you here today, and I'll turn it back over to David.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And Yamila, with apologies, we're a little short on time. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, hand it over to you. We may not have time for questions from the group, but I think the information that everybody's providing is really terrific. So Yamila Sterling Baker is program manager for the Food System Support, which is a program of Solid Ground. She staffs the Seattle Food Committee's work. It's a coalition comprised of 28 food banks in the Seattle area. Yamila was formerly a project manager for Xerox Corporation, publication director for the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, and assistant program director for Melrose to I Have a Dream program in the South Bronx, where she focused on youth identity and empowerment. Yamila, go ahead and take it away. Whoops, sorry.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much again for the invitation. And it's great because Sarah and Derek have already pretty much provided a lot of the background of and the services that the Seattle Food Committee receives, right, which is the food delivery and also the EFAP funding. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of review of what the Seattle Food Committee is, right? So the Seattle Food Committee is 28 food banks in the Seattle area. And each food bank operates differently, and I apologize for the background noise. So yes, so they provide, each food bank is completely different. A lot of them have been moving towards client choice, supermarket model, but that was before COVID, right? Before COVID hit. So then March came and everything stopped. And as Derek Sandison was discussing, right, a lot of the food banks are being either managed, supported, operated by a lot of volunteers who were seniors or retirees. And something that really happened during COVID was that none of the food banks decided to close. Each food bank decided to continue. So that's something that it was due to the circumstances. They realized that as a community, right, that there was a duty to support our fellow community members to continue to provide food. So the program that I'm managing before COVID, it was only one coordinator, 2 drivers. We also delivered to 22 out of the 28 food banks. So it was one coordinator, 2 drivers, and the manager, right? To pretty much do system administration. That's through the funding that we get through the city of Seattle. Essentially is convene meetings on a monthly basis. So it's only 2 meetings in a month, and then provide trainings and events and food delivery. COVID happened, and The WSDA had some funding that needed to be through EFAP that needed to be distributed for COVID for capacity increase, because they realized that food banks needed additional funding for capacity. And then also, but we didn't have anybody. Some of the food banks were stranded because we didn't have anybody to sort out the food, right? So what happened? So the WSDA, Katie Rains, she was instrumental in communicating and providing the coordination of the National Guards. So from that moment forward, when we realized that we were receiving additional funding through the WSDA and also from the city of Seattle, our team increased to 8 coordinators and assistants, and also 11 National Guards that we were deploying on a daily basis to not only to support food banks on a day-to-day operations, which is like sorting out food and also delivery, but also we, in a span of 5 months, 6 months, we delivered 333 deliveries of PPE supplies. So we were delivering PPE supplies on a daily basis. So all of this we were trying to manage, making sure that all the food banks had everything that they needed, also being somewhat of an emotional support, because everyone was having their own personal challenges, and then also professionally as well. So we were trying to we were conscious of it. We trying to utilize the emotional intelligence and trauma-informed care type of training to make sure that they were supported and they were as much support as possible to support the community.
Yamila, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have to finish this segment of the meeting. We've got the next segment of the meeting to go to. Quick question, are people able to hang on? We may open up some breakout rooms at the end of this for additional questions. So if you're able to hang on, maybe we can do that. Thank you all so much. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us today to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing and the really important work that's being done to help fight hunger in our communities, be it across Washington State or right here in downtown Seattle. President Jimmy, back to you. Thank you.